Hi folks, you're with us today, Tassus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what conditions are needed for democracy. And when I say democracy, I'm using the term generically to say whether people vote to decide their government. You know, some will say, "Oh, it's a republic," but people still fucking decide by voting, and so that's what I'm talking about. I say democracy. Now, at best, even at its zenith, around 15% of the nations of the world had democracy that you consider to be a functioning democracy. There are some that had sham democracies, and I've never really thought India was a democracy. It's a bit of a stretch to say that's a democracy given how things are done there. But I suppose you could say it's an early stage democracy, to be kind. But really, democracy is something that only a very small club of nations or group of nations achieve a functioning democracy. And free and fair elections, no cheating, no fake ballots, this sort of thing, and the outcome that from that is that the parties agree to exchange government based on the will of the people, and that's a functioning democracy. When World War II ended, the Americans were pushing the British hard, and the French and others to give up their colonial empires. There was some American assistance, say in to help the French in Vietnam, because they were afraid of the communists getting in there. But other than that, the Americans wanted the European colonial powers to give up their colonial possessions, and it was presumed that these areas would then become effectively American client states. The Americans seriously overestimated the amount of commercial clout that the colonial powers had, Britain in particular. But a functioning democracy, the idea is that the Americans had was that these places that had experienced very limited democracy or no democracy, wherever they were in the world, whether they're ex-colonial areas or I think would greet and welcome democracy. And I'm not sure how sincere that was, but if you look at the 90s, the idea with spreading democracy was a deliberate attempt by, if you like, the earlier deep state or the globalist cabal to destabilize those parts of the world, just so the globalists could penetrate them more easily. But in the post-colonial era, there was a lot of rejoicing. If you look back at the time, a lot of the United Nations and various editorials and think tanks were rejoicing that now all these places will become democracies, and they'd be wealthy and a paradise would ensue. Most of their elites had been Western educated and so on. And of course, that just didn't come to pass. I don't think there's a single a place in Africa that you would consider a functioning democracy. Certainly not by Western standards, anyway. Now, a lot of the commentators at the time, not all, but a lot of the commentators at the time who seemed to be in the know and understood the issues, including many black commentators, said, look, democracy can only function in certain conditions and under certain circumstances. Given how black people don't see, if you have power, why should I hand it over to someone else? If you have power, use it to kill off your opponents, use it to crush your opponents. Why would you willingly hand over power? If there's wealth and goodies to be taken, use your power to take it. Why share it with people? So the concept of power and power sharing and agreements of power sharing, building for the future, all these sorts of things were not really something that the African black nations and the people in it and the tribes really understood. If there's lots of stuff there, take it. Tomorrow's another day, and hey, who cares? This is why they're so poor at maintaining mechanical equipment and things like that. It's just very hard to get them to do it. And you're having worked with a lot of organizations doing business in Africa and been around the world many times myself. Something you just hear everywhere, that when it comes to maintenance, you've either got directly supervised the black people to do it, or white people have to do it. You can't have something in between. You can see this to some extent in a lot of Arabic places as well. But also in the Middle East, there was an idea after World War One. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. A lot of the areas that the Ottomans controlled around the Middle East would now become democracies and so on. And again, after World War II, that view was held. But a lot of people are saying, well, look, given the nature of Islam, the tribal nature of that whole area in the Middle East, the democracy is very unlikely, and it's going to be impossible. So the areas that were supposed to rise up with democratic governments, and everyone's going to vote and it was all going to work out well in Africa and the Middle East and around Asia, it just didn't happen. And there were some appeared to be perplexed, but others said, well, no, because democracy is a unique thing that is a white Western gig. It's unique to them. And outside of that, you're unlikely to ever see it work. And again, this is commentators from 50, 60 years ago. As a kid, when I sort of first, it was a bit of a history buff and everything, I first started looking at that, I couldn't see why democracy couldn't work. Why would people, given that the democracies are the richest countries in the world, and given that's the path you can go on, become democratic and have private property and private contract and these sort of things, that'll be the path to great riches for everybody. So you have a very rich, powerful nation and so on. Why wouldn't anybody want that? But that's not how everybody thinks. And I find actually in traveling around the world that this was considered to be, well, why would I want rich people in they're peasants? Why would I want them to be rich? Okay, I want to be rich, but why should I want anyone else to be rich, and so on. So I noticed this attitude all around the place, and democracy was the same thing. Why would I share power? Why would I hand it over? And it's just something that seemed to be beyond the scope of comprehension for most of these people. So coming back to the commentary in the 1950s, that the Black and Middle Eastern, Arabic, Islamic nations and so on would be unable to successfully embrace democracy in anything resembling the same way that the white polities did, such as Britain and the United States and so on, and that this wouldn't it just wouldn't take off, and the conditions and circumstances that evolved into democracy in Europe, particularly in Western Europe, they couldn't replicate outside of that, and so there was a unique Western gig. Now, if you look at, say, the limited democracy of Rome or of Athens and so on, or even some of the assemblies of the Italian city-states in the medieval era, there was, I don't think it was a uniquely evolved in the same way that Britain did. I think, or democracy did, say, in the modern era. As far as I can tell, it is very much a Western thing, and outside of the West, you didn't really see democracy. Certainly nothing that would last any great amount. Sure, you had councils that maybe assisted the monarch and things like that. So you could say that's a kind of a constitutional monarchy in a way, but they were short-lived, and arbitrary power was really the issue rather than sharing it or adhering to the rule of law. What happened in the West, and again using Britain as an example, there was agreement between the ruled and the ruler to form a social contract. We'll have very clear rules, and everyone has abided by those rules. So it gives a sense of fairness. We'll have an independent courts, and those courts will, without political interference, that didn't work perfectly, but it worked reasonably well. They'll make independent decisions free from government interference. Then we'll have free and fair elections that will reflect the will of the people. So that's very much a Western thing, and the opposite in certain Western history, in relation to Western, the opposite of that is that we squabble over who gets power, and then it's civil war, and there's dynasties, there's warlords, and there's all sorts of strife. Now, once an economy reaches a certain level of wealth, where there's wealth continuity in trade and just mercantile activity generally, or industrial activity. The idea of an internal conflict that disrupts that it really causes everyone to lose. Nobody really wins out of that. So the idea is, let's avoid that scenario by having a set of rules that we agree on. But in countries that are already poor and where there's not that massive wealth continuity, where there's a large number of people that will suffer if lose wealth if there's any sort of internal disruption, then in those situations there tends to be only a small number of winners and losers. There's just an elite. There's a few hundred people that they're going to get very rich, or they're going to lose out and become poor, or get taken out the back and shot or something. But that, given the small number of people involved, there's no real wider investment in tomorrow and in the welfare of, if you like, the Commonwealth. And this is what I think plays a role in separating the concept of and the evolution of democracy in the West to what we see in Africa and elsewhere. And look how the South African blacks were given a functioning democracy, and they've managed to ruin it in quite a short space of time. So it is uniquely Western and white in a lot of ways, but it relied heavily on homogeneity. That was a very, very important part of the democracy, whether it be in France, Britain, Germany. The American experience was new in as much as it was built on freedom, and freedoms that somebody acquired in coming to the US they didn't have previously. So that tended to create a melting pot effect. But it was very much driven by the constitutional, driven by British values, British laws, British courts, concepts of justice, and so on. It was very much modelled around that, so that the continuities from the original British establishment, and it was kept. So now you had aberrations like the Irish coming in and doing the Tammany Hall thing and corrupting democracy that way, and you had various places where those sorts of things happened, but the overall architecture and the overall infrastructure held together. With the mass influx or the mass migration and the multicultural mass migration coming into the West, forced by the globalists, this is causing a larger number of people to be in the West that have no investment in democracy. They have no investment in the rule of law and due legal process and sharing power and sharing wealth. They have no investment in that at all. The Chinese and the Indians in particular, they are representing their own diaspora very much, and they come to the West to take money, not to share it or to give it. And so they see democracy as, well, who cares? And they're more than happy. I mean, they come from very corrupt places, all these people. So they have no investment in the concept of power, how it's shared, exchanged, and investment tomorrow. They've got no concept of that. And they've got no concept of the common weal and these sorts of things. Now, once these things are gone, then the very basis for democracy disappears. It has no supporters, in effect. And so will disappear, I think, fairly quickly, which is again what the globalists want. To the globalists, that would be the desired outcome. So I see that democracy will disappear because of the multiculturalism, because no one has an investment in it, or only the minority have an investment in it. The other thing too with the United States is all the people coming to the United States pretty much were European, white and Christian, and so they would be naturally more attracted to those sorts of values than others might be. And so, but when we look at the people from the subcontinent, the Muslims, and the sub-Saharan African blacks, none of these people have a tradition or a desire or an interest or care about democracy and people voting to decide their government. These people want, no, I want my people in there. I want my people, especially in the government, making sure we get our share of the loot. And that's how democracy ends, really, I think, at that point. Now, whether it goes out with a whimper or a bang, that's to be determined. But I think that's where we're heading. You've been with Tacitus about your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.